I was 16 when my father decided to abandon me in the middle of the ocean. I know how crazy that sounds, but hear me out. This isn't some exaggerated teenage drama. This really happened, and it shaped everything that came after. My name is Alex, and until that point, I'd had what I thought was a pretty typical life. My dad, Victor, ran a fishing charter business off the coast of Maine. He was a big guy, tough and weathered by salt and sun, always bragging about surviving storms that would make grown men cry. My mom, Nora, owned a small bookstore in town. Quiet, reserved, she spent most of her time lost in novels. I also had a younger brother, Sammy, who was 13, obsessed with video games, and rarely spoke more than 2 sentences a day. Things started getting weird about a week before the incident. Dad had begun dropping odd hints at dinner, little comments about learning the real way of life, and survival skills every man should know. I'd always brushed off his macho lessons before, but this time, something about the intensity of his voice made me uneasy. Mom stayed quiet, eyes down on her plate, avoiding any confrontation. Sammy was oblivious, earbuds in, zoning out the tension with loud gaming streams. One Friday evening, Dad announced he'd booked a weekend fishing trip, just me and him. He said it was crucial father-son bonding, a chance to toughen me up. Mom didn't say a word, but her fingers trembled as she cleared the dishes. Saturday morning arrived, cold and cloudy. I climbed onto the old fishing boat, the Seawolf, reluctantly, already dreading the awkward hours ahead. Dad barely spoke as he steered us miles away from shore, further than we'd ever gone together. The waves grew larger, the coast disappeared, and soon it was just open water and silence. "Alex," he finally said, voice firm but distant. "Grab the nets. Time to prove you're worth something." We spent the morning fishing in silence. By noon, the weather shifted abruptly. A drizzle turned to rain, and then to harsh gusts battering the boat. Dad seemed strangely calm, almost satisfied. "I'm gonna check below deck," he said casually. "Stay up here and keep an eye on the horizon." I stood shivering, clutching my raincoat, watching the storm close in. 5, 10, then 20 minutes passed. Finally, uneasy, I went to check on him, but found the cabin door locked from inside. "Dad," I shouted, pounding on the wood. "What are you doing?" No response. Panic swelled as I realized something was terribly wrong. I tried the radio, dead static. Cell phone had no signal this far out. Suddenly, the engine roared to life, but instead of steering, Dad had set the boat adrift on autopilot, heading further out. I screamed again, banging until my fists ached. Still nothing. After what felt like eternity, I heard footsteps below deck. His voice came through muffled but clear, chilling me to the bone. "If you're really my son, you'll survive this. It's how my father taught me. It's how you learn who you really are." Then silence. Moments later, to my horror, he emerged carrying a small duffel bag, climbed into the inflatable dinghy strapped at the stern, and without looking back, cut the rope. He drifted away, disappearing rapidly into the storm. I stared in disbelief, heart hammering, as waves crashed violently against the hull. Panic gave way to survival instinct. I scrambled to regain control of the drifting boat, hands shaking so badly I could barely steer. Rain lashed my face, blinding me. I tried desperately to remember everything I'd ever learned on this boat. The engine sputtered and then died, leaving me adrift. I collapsed onto the soaked deck, gasping, feeling the cold terror of being truly alone. Hours passed. The storm eased slightly, revealing nothing but endless ocean around me. Darkness was creeping in, and with it came the chilling realization my father had truly left me here to fend for myself. I shivered uncontrollably, bitterly remembering his constant refrain about manhood and strength. Yet, here I was, betrayed and helpless, wondering if I would even survive the night. Nightfall brought terror I'd never imagined. Every shadow in the waves felt alive, every sound amplified my fear. Sleep was impossible. I sat huddled against the cabin wall, waiting desperately for dawn. When sunrise finally came, I felt drained, hungry, and numb. I found a few energy bars and bottled water below deck. That small bit of luck was enough to keep me going, at least temporarily. But without navigation skills or working communications, I was utterly lost. Days began blurring together, exhaustion setting in, hallucinations flickering at the edge of my vision. On the 4th morning, a miracle, a distant boat appeared. I screamed, waving my jacket wildly. They spotted me and approached cautiously, shocked by the sight of a pale, trembling teen stranded on a drifting vessel. Once on board their boat, I spilled my story. At first, they stared skeptically, unable to comprehend my father's cruelty. When they realized I was serious, their pitying glances stung deeply. They radioed authorities, who promptly notified my mother. Mom arrived at the docks looking devastated and ashamed. Dad, they said, had vanished. When authorities searched for him, they found nothing, no trace, no evidence. Just a father who'd abandoned his own son at sea. They handed me back to Mom quietly, whispering awkward condolences. Back home, Sammy barely acknowledged my return, absorbed by his games. Mom tried apologizing, tearfully whispering vague regrets. But the questions tormented me. How could she allow this? Did she know it was coming? What kind of family had I belonged to? That incident ended my childhood. My trust in family shattered forever, replaced by a bitter resolve. I moved out at 18, far away from that coastal town, severing all ties. Mom sent occasional texts, always unanswered. Sammy vanished into his virtual worlds. 6 years passed, and I finally began building something resembling stability. Until yesterday, when a familiar figure appeared unexpectedly outside my workplace, a frail, older woman I almost didn't recognize. It was my mother, crying uncontrollably, shaking as she reached out, pleading for forgiveness. And just like that, the nightmare I'd left behind caught up with me once again. It had been 6 long years since I'd last seen my mother. 6 years spent burying memories, distancing myself from everything and everyone who reminded me of that dreadful day at sea. But now, standing right there in front of me, was the woman who let it all happen, my mother, Nora. She looked smaller, frailer somehow. Her dark hair was streaked with gray, her eyes sunken from exhaustion, sleeplessness etched deep into her features. She stood trembling outside my office building, her eyes desperately searching mine for any flicker of recognition, or worse, mercy. Alex, she whispered, her voice breaking, tears already streaming down her cheeks. People passing by glanced over curiously, sensing the raw emotion unfolding. I clenched my jaw, fighting back the sudden wave of anger rising inside me. You shouldn't be here, I said coldly, glancing around uncomfortably. What do you want? Just to talk, she begged, stepping forward hesitantly. Please. Just 5 minutes. Reluctantly, I motioned toward a quieter spot away from prying eyes, between 2 parked cars. Arms crossed defensively, I waited for her to explain herself. She wiped tears from her cheeks with trembling hands, struggling to compose herself. I'm so sorry, she began, her voice barely audible, shaking with regret. I know there's nothing I can say to make it right. But you need to understand, I didn't know what Victor was going to do. He said it was a simple fishing trip. He promised me he just wanted some quality time with you. I scoffed, bitterness lacing my voice. Quality time? Leaving your own child stranded in the middle of the ocean is quality time to you. She shook her head frantically. I swear, Alex, if I'd known, I would have stopped him. Then why didn't you do something afterward? I snapped, the old wound suddenly feeling as fresh as ever. You let him disappear. You let me deal with everything alone. Did you even try to find him? Her gaze dropped to the pavement, shame weighing heavily on her. I was afraid, she admitted softly, avoiding my eyes. I didn't know how to handle it. Victor always had that power over me. He said you'd survive, that you'd come home stronger. But when days passed and you didn't return, he vanished too, and I was terrified, paralyzed. I didn't know how to reach you, how to make it right. Paralyzed. I echoed angrily. You're my mother. You could have called someone. The Coast Guard, the police, anyone. I know. There's no excuse, she said, her voice breaking again. I should have protected you. I should have stopped him sooner. A heavy silence hung between us, punctuated only by her quiet sobs. Deep inside, a part of me wanted to forgive her, to believe her words. But the pain ran deeper than apologies could reach. Why are you here now, after all these years? I asked, my voice softer but firm. Why not just leave me alone? She hesitated, eyes flickering anxiously. Because things have gotten worse, she finally admitted, fear shadowing her features. Your brother, Sammy, he left home last year. He couldn't handle Victor's pressure, the silence, the pretending everything was normal. Victor resurfaced recently, drinking, bitter, blaming everyone but himself. He's lost everything, the business, the house, and now he's lashing out. I'm scared, Alex. I don't have anyone else. I stared at her, incredulous, feeling anger and disbelief rise again. And you thought I'd be the one to fix it? After everything you've done? No, she whispered, shaking her head miserably. I didn't come for your help. I had to see you, know you're okay. To tell you I'm sorry. I needed you to know I never stopped regretting it. Her sincerity startled me, the raw pain in her voice echoing something I'd buried deep inside myself. Still, it wasn't enough. I took a step back, shaking my head. You lost that right when you left me out there. I'm sorry things went wrong for you, but it's not my responsibility anymore. You have to live with your choices, just like I've had to." She reached out, desperate, but I pulled away sharply, turning to leave. "Alex, please," she begged, voice cracking. "Can't we at least try?" "No," I said quietly, firmly. Too late. Ignoring her desperate pleas, I walked back inside, heart pounding. My coworkers stared curiously but wisely avoided asking questions. I sat at my desk, hands trembling, realizing I hadn't even asked her how she'd found me. She must have spent weeks tracking me down. The thought sent chills through my spine. Hours later, as I finally calmed down, my phone buzzed repeatedly. Text after text appeared from unknown numbers, messages from old friends, distant relatives, even former classmates, all echoing a similar refrain. "Your mother contacted me. She's desperately looking for you. Are you okay?" Anger surged again as I realized what she'd done. Unable to reach me directly, she dragged everyone else into it. My phone continued vibrating, each message fueling my fury until I could no longer take it. I switched it off, feeling trapped once more by the past I tried so desperately to escape. That night, alone in my tiny apartment, I stared at the ceiling, memories of that stormy day at sea flooding back. The helplessness, the betrayal, the stark loneliness. Now, years later, the same feelings threatened to overwhelm me again. A knock at the door startled me awake from dark thoughts. Warily, I opened it, only to find my neighbor holding a small package. "This came for you earlier," she said gently. I signed for it. Inside was an old, worn notebook, my mother's handwriting immediately recognizable. On the first page, she'd scribbled, "Alex, you deserve the truth. Please, read this. It's everything I should have said earlier." Part of me wanted to throw it away, to remain untouched by her excuses and explanations. But another part, buried deeper, couldn't help wondering what secrets these pages held, what truths she'd hidden all these years. Taking a deep breath, I closed my eyes briefly, opened the notebook, and began to read. What I discovered inside was far darker and more disturbing than anything I'd imagined, and would soon plunge me deeper into a past I thought I'd left behind forever. I sat motionless at my kitchen table, the dim glow of a single lamp illuminating the pages of my mother's notebook. My heart hammered against my ribcage, and my fingers trembled slightly as I turned the first page, uncertain of what I'd find. Her handwriting, usually elegant, was hurried, desperate, almost frantic. I began reading slowly, each word pulling me deeper into a past I'd fought so hard to escape. "Alex, if you're reading this, it means I've finally found you and summoned the courage to tell you the truth that should have been yours years ago. There's so much you don't know about your father, about me, and why things happened as they did. Please, even if you hate me, read this until the end." I exhaled sharply, bracing myself. Victor wasn't always this way. When we first met, he was kind, charismatic, ambitious. But beneath that charm lay something darker. His father, your grandfather Michael, was brutal. Michael believed suffering built character, that pain and isolation forged strength. Victor's childhood was filled with physical punishment and emotional torment. He survived, but it changed him. I paused, gripping the edge of the table, memories flickering back to Dad's cold, distant eyes as he left me alone on the boat. Suddenly, those moments felt horribly connected, a twisted lineage of cruelty. I kept reading. When you were born, Victor vowed he'd break the cycle, swore he'd never become his father. But as you grew older, his fear overtook his resolve. He started obsessing over your strength, convinced softness was weakness. He pushed you harder, emotionally, sometimes physically, always convinced he was protecting you from becoming what he feared most, himself. Bitterness swelled within me, a toxic mixture of pity and rage. Protecting me? He destroyed my life. I turned the page. Then something happened. Victor's business faced ruin. The fishing charters failed, debts mounted. He blamed himself, but mostly, he blamed everyone else, including you. He began spiraling, convinced our family was weak, unworthy. The trip on the boat was supposed to be his way of proving something to himself, that if you survived, his failures weren't complete. When you disappeared for days, presumed dead, he snapped completely, left town, vanished. I was terrified he'd harmed you, but more terrified to confront him or call the police. I failed you completely. I sat back, the anger inside me simmering. Her honesty was brutal, heartbreaking even, but it didn't excuse abandoning me to fate. Yet the story grew darker. "Alex, after you left, Victor returned, broken, bitter, blaming me for losing you. He became erratic, violent at times. Sammy shut down completely, retreating further into his games, unable to cope. The house became unbearable, and finally, Sammy ran away too, following in your footsteps. Victor lost everything, drinking heavily, drowning in regret, yet refusing to admit guilt. But there's something worse you need to know, something Victor confessed one night in a drunken rage. My breath caught sharply. The words blurred as tears stung my eyes, yet I forced myself onward. The day Victor left you on the boat, he planned to return after a few hours. But the storm forced him off course, pushing him far from your location. Yet instead of immediately searching for you, he panicked, fled to shore, and lied to everyone, including me. He told me he'd searched for days. It wasn't until later he admitted the truth, that he'd left you intentionally, terrified you'd expose him as weak. He'd abandoned you, Alex, hoping you'd simply disappear forever. A chill ran down my spine, ice-cold horror filling my chest. My father had knowingly, willingly abandoned me to die. My fists clenched around the notebook as fury surged, raw and uncontrollable. But her next words stopped me cold. Recently, Victor's desperation has grown dangerous. He's been obsessing about finding you again, not to apologize, but because he blames you for everything that's gone wrong in his life. I came to warn you. I fear he'll stop at nothing to punish you again. Please, Alex, be careful. I slammed the notebook closed, breath shallow, panic pulsing through every nerve. The man who'd left me to die was now hunting me again. Before I could gather my thoughts, my phone vibrated violently, an unknown number flashing urgently. Against my instincts, I answered. Alex, a familiar, chilling voice growled. My father's voice, rough, venomous, unmistakably furious. You shouldn't have opened old wounds, boy. Fear and adrenaline shot through me, momentarily silencing any coherent thought. How did you get this number? I demanded, voice shaking despite my best effort to sound calm. His laughter was dark, humorless. You can't hide forever, Alex. You've been telling your story. You've made me the villain. Now you'll learn there are consequences. The line went dead. I stood frozen, heartbeat pounding in my ears, realizing he'd been watching, waiting for this moment all along. Panic surged again, but I forced myself to think clearly. I had to protect myself, had to end this once and for all. No longer the helpless boy adrift at sea. I was ready now to confront my father head-on, to ensure he'd never harm me or anyone else again. But before I could move, a knock echoed sharply on my apartment door, firm, authoritative. Through the peephole, I saw two uniformed officers standing grim-faced in the hallway. Opening the door cautiously, my stomach dropped when one officer spoke, voice solemn. Alex Jensen? Yes, I managed weakly. We need to talk to you about your father, Victor Jensen. He's missing again, and we believe he might be dangerous. We think he's headed here. May we come in? Stepping aside numbly, I let them enter, my mind racing. Dad had already set his trap, and now I was caught squarely in it. Whatever he'd planned for me, I knew now, it wasn't over. Not even close. The officers sat in my tiny living room, their expressions tense. I stood frozen, heart pounding, the echoes of my father's voice still chilling me to the bone. We've been tracking Victor Jensen for weeks. The older officer began carefully. After losing his business and home, he spiraled completely. Recently, he's become increasingly erratic. We suspect he's involved in several disturbances back in Maine, property damage, threatening locals. He blames you, Alex, for everything that's happened. I sank onto the couch, trying to process what they were saying. Victor wasn't just angry. He'd become dangerous, consumed by the belief that I had somehow ruined his life. Do you know where he is now? I asked quietly. We believe he's here in the city, the second officer said grimly. He's been spotted in your neighborhood. You're not safe here. Do you have somewhere else you can stay? I nodded numbly, lying. Truthfully, I had nowhere. I'd isolated myself for so long that calling friends felt impossible. Yet staying meant risking my safety. We've increased patrols in the area, the officer reassured me, handing over his card. Call immediately if you see anything suspicious. We'll find him. After they left, silence enveloped me again. Nightfall turned every shadow into a threat. Paranoia consumed me. I checked doors and windows obsessively, each noise outside jolting me with fear. Hours passed. Sleep seemed impossible until, exhausted, I drifted into a restless dream. A crash startled me awake sometime around 3 a.m. My heart raced as I sat upright, listening closely. Footsteps echoed softly in the hallway outside my door. Panic surged. Someone was there. Quietly, trembling, I grabbed a baseball bat I'd kept beside my bed for years. I moved cautiously toward the door, peering through the peephole into darkness. Suddenly, I noticed a shadow shifting near my window. A chill ran down my spine. He was already inside. "Alex," a voice whispered harshly. Victor's voice, low, menacing, barely audible. "We need to talk, son." My breath caught painfully. "Leave, Dad," I said firmly, masking my fear. "I'm calling the police." He laughed softly, humorlessly. "I just want to talk. Don't be weak." Fear gave way to rage, years of pent-up anger boiling over. I flung open the bedroom door, gripping the bat tightly, confronting the man who destroyed my life. Victor stood hunched in shadows, thinner, worn, eyes wild and glassy. He'd aged dramatically, no longer the imposing figure of my nightmares. Yet danger still radiated from him. "You ruined me, Alex," he growled, stepping forward slowly. "You humiliated me in front of everyone." "I ruined you?" I shouted incredulously. "You abandoned me. You left me to die. You survived, didn't you?" He snarled bitterly. "That should have made you stronger. Instead, you destroyed our family. You turned everyone against me." I laughed bitterly, voice shaking. "You did that yourself." Victor lunged forward suddenly, desperation and fury mixing dangerously. Reflexively, I swung the bat, connecting sharply with his arm. He stumbled backward, cursing loudly, crashing into furniture. A neighbor's dog began barking furiously, lights flickering on across the street. Victor stared at me, chest heaving, eyes filled with hate, but also something else, defeat. "You'll regret this," he hissed, scrambling to his feet. "You're not a man. You're nothing." Before I could respond, he fled through the open window into darkness. Shaking uncontrollably, I slammed it shut, collapsing to the floor, heart pounding violently. Minutes later, flashing lights illuminated my apartment. Police flooded inside, taking statements, photographing damage. The officers' eyes held sympathy but also worry. Victor was unstable, dangerous, unpredictable. Despite their reassurance, it felt like empty comfort. By sunrise, I was left alone again, apartment quiet except for distant city sounds. I knew Victor wouldn't stop, not now. His desperation made him even more dangerous. Unable to stay, I packed quickly. Just essentials. Clothes, laptop, phone charger, and my mother's notebook. Deep inside, I knew my past wouldn't let me escape so easily. Victor's voice echoed cruelly. "You're not a man. You're nothing." I stepped outside, breathing cold morning air, uncertain where to go, only knowing I had to vanish before he found me again. But running wasn't enough. Eventually, I'd have to face him, end it once and for all. As I walked briskly away from the life I'd carefully built, a single thought consumed me. This wasn't over. I spent the next few weeks moving constantly, cheap motels, rented rooms, never staying in one place longer than a night or two. Each unfamiliar bed reminded me how trapped I was, a prisoner of my father's rage. During those restless nights, my thoughts often returned to my mother's notebook. Her final warnings echoed repeatedly in my mind. Victor was losing control, becoming dangerous. He'd never stop hunting me until one of us broke completely. But running forever wasn't living, it was merely surviving. And survival without freedom was worthless. I realized, finally, that I had only one real option: face Victor once and for all, on my terms, not his. I spent hours carefully formulating a plan. I used burner phones to send him messages, dropping subtle clues about my whereabouts, luring him toward the coast, the place it had all begun. If we were going to confront our past, we'd do it on familiar ground. Victor responded predictably, his messages growing increasingly frantic, threatening, obsessed. Every reply revealed just how close to unraveling he'd become. Finally, I chose a specific place, a remote pier, abandoned long ago, battered by years of storms and salt spray. It was the perfect spot, isolated, symbolic, and fitting. The evening I arrived, storm clouds gathered ominously overhead. The sea churned restlessly, waves crashing against wooden pilings, echoing the tension building inside me. I waited patiently, feeling strangely calm despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. Soon, headlights pierced the gloom. A battered old pickup truck pulled up, engine sputtering to silence. Victor emerged, silhouette illuminated briefly by distant lightning. He looked worse than before, gaunt, unshaven, haunted by failure. "You picked quite a place, Alex," he sneered bitterly, voice carried by harsh winds. Bringing us full circle, huh? It's where you left me to die. I replied calmly, meeting his glare steadily. Seems fitting we finish it here. He moved forward slowly, movement stiff, weary. His voice trembled slightly, betraying cracks beneath his bravado. You destroyed everything, Alex. Our family, my life. For what? Revenge? No. I countered sharply, stepping closer. You destroyed everything yourself. I survived despite you, not because of you. You're just a coward who couldn't face his failures. His fists clenched tightly, knuckles whitening. I tried making you strong, tried teaching you something real. You refused. You broke us. I shook my head slowly, confidently. Strength isn't cruelty, Dad. It's kindness, resilience, survival without destroying others. You never understood that. For a brief moment, uncertainty flickered in his eyes, doubt creeping through his anger. But pride quickly smothered it. You don't get to lecture me, he snapped viciously. I made you, and I can break you. He lunged suddenly, fury overpowering logic. But this time I was ready. Sidestepping quickly, I let momentum carry him past me, stumbling onto wet, rotting planks. His balance faltered, anger blinding his coordination. Lightning cracked overhead, illuminating us starkly. Victor recovered, turning again to face me, breathing heavily. You think you've won, Alex? He growled, voice weakening. You're nothing. You'll always be nothing. I survived you. I replied evenly, raising my voice over wind and waves. That makes me stronger than you ever were. His face twisted, pain mixing strangely with anger, raw, vulnerable, broken. The realization slowly washed over him. He'd lost control, lost his family, lost himself. I never wanted it to end like this, he whispered, voice barely audible through crashing waves. I just wanted to prove. You only proved your own cowardice. I interrupted firmly, stepping closer. You're alone because of your choices, not mine. You abandoned me, Sammy Mom. And now you're abandoning yourself. Victor stared blankly, defeat finally settling into his eyes. He looked older, smaller, human, perhaps for the first time in his life. Thunder echoed distantly, rain beginning to fall steadily, drenching us both. You have two choices, I said quietly, compassion softening my voice. Turn yourself in, get help, own your mistakes. Or continue living this way, angry, bitter, running. But I'm done running from you. He stood silently, rain dripping from his chin, shoulders sagging beneath invisible burdens. Finally, without speaking, he turned slowly, moving toward his truck. At the door, he paused briefly, turning to glance back once. His gaze lingered, sorrowful and resigned, before he climbed inside, engine sputtering back to life. Tires spun briefly before catching, carrying him away into darkness. I stood alone on that pier, rain soaking me through. Waves crashed rhythmically, cleansing wounds long open. Something inside me shifted profoundly, finally free from fear, hatred, the chains he'd bound me with for years. Victor chose exile, isolation, bitterness, but that was his choice now, not mine. I'd offered redemption, he'd refused. My conscience was clear. Slowly, purposefully, I walked toward shore. Each step carried me further from the broken past, towards something new, something hopeful. I didn't know where I'd go next, but wherever it was, I'd walk there on my terms, stronger, wiser, finally free. And as the storm passed, dawn broke over calm waters, sunlight spilling across endless ocean, promising something I'd long forgotten possible. Peace.